Coming at you today in the middle of the PQ season, fresh off of the confirmed deaths of Zen and Enigma. I know a lot of players are sad and maybe even lost right now to losing their homes in this wide world of race. Enigma players, you're no longer able to just bully these Guardian players by casting Mirror Guy. This one simple trick. Zen players, you're no longer able to bully the other aggro decks with a silly little Zen state token. All of that is done after this Friday. Those heroes are sailed off into the sunset. They've moved on to the living legend format, never to be seen again. So anyway, I've got a video for you today about what that meta shift might look like, and we're going to look at some of those predictions. So obviously we're going to start off with Aurora still at the top of the list. Her matchups haven't really changed for the most part. She's still got a really good matchup spread, and there might be a consideration with the Guardian players coming out to play again now that Enigma's gone, thinking they're going to get their time in the sun again. Assassin players got a decent number of sideboard slots back, especially Slippy players, simply because Enigma left. I think Slippy got 6 or so sideboard slots back. I'm not too sure on what news we're running these days, but I'm sure they could make some space there. So worth noting that these decks might be coming out to try and counter Aurora, now that arguably she's more easily countered, since a lot of these control decks were being kept down by a sort of damage check that Enigma had on her board state, to where if she played a board state, you had to present enough damage in that turn, or have some kind of evasive damage in that turn in order to destroy the board state. So a lot of these decks that had cards that would fulfill that role, or cards in general that were just go again on them, can be added back, or removed rather, from their decks. So they got some sideboard slots back there. So it remains to be seen on how do they go more defensive. Do we see like Warriors come back? Do we see Guardians come back? So I'm really curious to see how this upcoming weekends go. But yeah, Aurora is still the best deck. Next here we have Prism. She's really only scared of Brute, Spin Set, maybe Dio and Ira. But otherwise, really solid hero. Number 1 in the charts, number 1 in our hearts. What can I say? She just does it the best, the greatest, the lightest. Next we have Florian, our token Edgelord Runeblade. He has lost one of his worst matchups in Enigma. And you range from pretty good to decent into most heroes in this top meta. As I mentioned in a previous video, there's the Scepter builds going around, and in fact Alexander Vore recently released a deck tech, I think over on the Arcane Games YouTube channel. Definitely recommend checking that out if you're interested in all of Florian. Come back and let me know what you think of the Scepter build and how it might affect his meta share, and also like some of his matchup spreads. I don't think it seems to affect too much, but who knows? Definitely been wrong before. Either way, I think you are one of the top heroes right now. You're only really worried about Wizard, from my understanding, particularly Kano, I think is a pretty bad one. Maybe if CYB comes back around, you have to start running Poison the Well again, but from what I understand, it makes those sorts of matchups better, at least. So I think you have game into pretty much everything, so definitely a good hero right now. Slippy is next. He would be the Assassin if I was playing one that I would play right now. He's good into basically all of the top decks. Florian may or may not be tough for you. I'm getting mixed signals based off of people I've been talking to. Either way, there's not a lot of heroes you're scared of, if there are any. So I think if you're playing an Assassin right now, Slippy is definitely one of the best ones, if not the best one. So yeah, throw him in A tier. Verdance is a deck I think would be quite good into the other top heroes as well. She's a pretty good matchup spread, and there's not too much you're worried about outside of New and Prism. But past that, like I said, you have a pretty decent shot into everything else. And just in case these Guardians come back and think they're going to, start showing up to the locals, whatever, you can remind them that you still have Wizard on your hero, and you can just blow them up if they take too long to kill you. So that's always a good thing, in my opinion. Next, we got New. She's still here. She still exists. I've seen a pretty significant drop, at least locally, from New player count over the past season or so. So I think maybe she's a little bit under people's radar right now, but I do think she is the second best assassin. Maybe there's an argument, depending on how the meta shifts, for her to reclaiming that #1 assassin spot. But for now, I'm comfortable putting her near the bottom of A tier. I don't think there's a lot of things you're too scared of. You have the option of running CYB. You're one of the best decks that can do so. So especially once Aurora leaves, I think that'll be pretty interesting to see how your deck changes. Next we have Vincent, who's a solid pick right now. With the potential of the format slowing down though, you'll definitely need to have a game plan into fatigue or life gain strategies. In fact, I brought a Vincent player who I don't think I've played before, so I can't remember his name, but I brought one Vincent player to fatigue in one of my PQs this weekend, so definitely still doable. And if you're playing Vincent right now and you're not really familiar with how to work yourself out of that situation, or if you don't catch on to it early enough, like essentially what I'm saying is come with a game plan for fatigue. What that is, I'm not really sure. I don't play a ton of Vincent myself, but I'm sure there's something's got to be there, right? Surely. So anyway, one other thing I would say about Vincent is that she does have what, in my opinion, is one of the higher skill ceilings in the game for a hero, and also one of the higher skill floors. So I think it would be like, you're going to need to get your reps in if you want to do well in Vincent, but at the end of the day, I do think it would be worthwhile, and I think she's a fairly well positioned hero right now, better than she's ever been. Next in the B tier, we have Kano. What do I gotta say about Kano? We know what he does. He blows you the fuck up. So just be aware that he exists, and there's not really a ton of bad matchups for him right now. Like Assassins can run this crazy like AB3 Spellvoid 3 setup, so like maybe that's kind of bad for you. But I think, again, going back to Vincent's like skill, floor, and ceiling thing, I think he's one of those heroes where we'll reward your reps and is like, you got to come into the game with a plan for these slower matchups. You need to know how to pitch stack. You need to know what you're aiming to do. You need to have some kind of method of winning these games, essentially. You can't just like, reliably blow people up off the top like you can Aurora. And even then, since I mentioned Aurora is not a great matchup for Kano, which is why he's not A tier right now for me. It's why he's B tier. Maybe even arguably C tier, because a lot of Auroras are running AB3 Spellvoid 2, and the good Aurora players will not be overextending into you. They will just hold that blue and wait for you to block and then, go face if they need to. But I do think that's a pretty good matchup for Aurora, simply because of her equipment. So not in like the best spot he's ever been in, but I do think it's a very reasonable hero to start putting in time into now, especially once Aurora leaves. Like I said, I expect the format to potentially slow down more depending on what High Seas does. So we'll see. Maybe there's a move into these sort of combo-y decks. I believe I watched Nathan Crawford's video recently, or one of his streams or something like that, and he kind of had a sort of similar opinion. I think he took it a few steps past where I did in my previous videos, but I do think the format is going to slow down now that Enigma's left, and then it's going to slow down even more once Aurora leaves, especially because, she keeps these slow decks down with the Flicker Arc combo. So that's the only deck I think that can really do both aggro and set up these really big spiky combo turns. Outside of like these pure combo decks, like Kano, like Verdance, that sort of thing, where you just have like this pitch stack combo that you say, if I get to this, you just will die. Florian also might fall into that camp with the Scepter build, or maybe there's like another pure OTK version. The current Scepter build of Florian seems to be sort of turtle bursty, but anyway, moving on. Dash.io, I think, has a pretty reasonable matchup spread, actually. People kind of go back and forth between doom and gloom on this, or back and forth between dooming and glooming and being high on it. You do have risk of fatigue, so you might notice a trend here. This is a really good time in Flesh and Blood to be a player who understands these longer games and is capable of enacting a more, what would you call it, like big scale game plan in the middle of a match, rather than just like a lot of heroes or a lot of aggro decks will tend to pull you into sort of what is the best for my turn right now? What is the best math I can do? Whereas I think this meta we're moving into, especially with Enigma gone, is going to ask a lot tougher questions of our player base. Can you deal with fatigue? Do you have a plan? can you pitch stack? Like these sorts of things. Can you manage your threat density? These are the questions that if you feel you are weak on them right now, I would highly recommend, if you're a competitive player, to focus on these skill sets, because I'm of the opinion, at least, that they will be very important very soon. But yeah, Dash IO, pretty good deck. You're good into like Aurora, you're pretty good into Prism, you have pretty reasonable game into a lot of these decks. I think a lot of the times you're just worried about fatigue. Also, you kind of dumpster wizard, from what I understand. So there's that as well. Null Time Zone sure is a card that they printed for you. Next we have KO. I think I've been a little bit too low on Brute for similar reasons to New. Just not really very played right now. But when I thought about it, I think KO actually has a pretty decent matchup spread. And if you're playing a Brute, I think you're just playing KO over Levia. Especially like with Levia, you have to, again, consider this fatigue sort of aspect, where you need to bring in this whole sideboard package of cards just to not die to fatigue. And you need to practice it. It's, in my opinion, relatively skill intensive. KO, I think, has a bit more of a straightforward game plan in terms of fatigue. And he just gets like more consistent value, turn over turn. So the longer the game goes, you're getting value out of those 6s you're discarding to your Brute effects. Azalea is an interesting hero. Her matchup spread seems pretty good. Seemingly, if Warrior and Guardian become more popular, you'll be real sad. And seemingly, with Life Gain potentially becoming more popular, you'll also be real sad. However, I do think that a lot of your other matchups are pretty good to solid, and you're serviceable into pretty much everything. Ranger as a class also has a lot of tech options, and you also get the ability to run Codex, which is just like one of the best cards in the game. You have, like I said, you have a lot of tech options. Poison the Well is a card that exists and maybe could be explored for that. I haven't explored it too much myself, but I talked to one of our locals, Michael, so shout out to him. He just won one of our ProQuests on Sunday. Azalea main, so we talked, and yeah, he seemed pretty down on it, but I'm not going to say I'm not convinced, because I'll definitely, I trust his word. He's a good player. But I just think there might be some answers for it that maybe they haven't really needed right now. So anyway, all that to say, I'm curious to see where she ends up. Right now, I think she's definitely got a pretty good matchup spread across the board, though. Nothing too insane, and I would definitely consider playing her. Fang, I think, is another hero where he's bad into a lot of decks. He has some sort of spiky matchups, but his hero ability is really good. You have the option of doing what Gregor's did and running Decimator Great Axe, which, they don't expect you coming into that and they bring all their D-Reacts and stuff like an aggro deck, and then you fatigue them. Pretty bad for them. So I think he's in an okay spot. Not amazing, not great, but if you get online early, you're sure good at it. You're sure, one of the best heroes. Next we have Victor and Jarl. Victor has some pretty bad matchups running around that are top meta right now, mainly the Wizards and New. Outside of that, he's in a pretty decent spot, and he has pretty solid game into the rest of the heroes, to be honest. So if you don't have a lot of Wizard, or you don't have any News, or both, I think Victor would be a pretty reasonable consideration for ProQuest. For top event, I think that would be maybe a little bit risky, simply because, like I said, those bad matchups still do exist and are sort of polarized. The other thing is, if you see a bunch of ninjas or anything like that, you could be pretty good. So it's worth keeping in mind. Jarl's sort of in the same boat. You're pretty good into some of these decks, pretty bad into others. I think if I was playing Guardian, I'd probably be playing Victor, even though he's a little bit more variance prone. But, Jarl is still a Guardian. He's pretty good into any heroes that don't like pitching cards. I think he's still reasonable, I guess, is what I'm saying. So I went ahead and stuck him at B tier. Remains to be seen, but I sure got beat up by one today, or Sunday, I should say. Knocked me out of top 8, essentially. Very close match, though. Shout out to Jacob on the Breaking the Chain podcast, and Cody as well. But yeah, me and Jacob played on, actually, I think it was Saturday, and yeah, he blew me up. I realized a little bit too late. I think it was turn 2, I realized he didn't have Arcane Barrier, and I had just pitch stacked a double Arc Lightning turn, and I was like, well, I could have just played it for 10 unpreventable on my first turn, but I just didn't notice. So that was a fat L. But anyway, I do think Jarl's pretty reasonable right now, so worth keeping an eye on, worth teching for, that sort of thing. Especially if you're Aurora or a deck that doesn't like to pitch. Lastly, we have some C tier heroes. I'll just talk about a few of these, namely Riptide. I don't think he's necessarily a bad hero, but the heroes he's good against aren't really meta right now. However, if your meta has a lot of warriors, ninjas, assassins, I think that Riptide is definitely worth consideration. For global meta, that's the reason he's a C tier, because he does have a lot of bad matchups in this A, B tier area. But it is worth noting, like I said, that at a local meta, he could be very much worth looking at. Ira, okay spot. She has some bad matchups here and there. I don't think there's any particular reason to play her right now. Not too much to say there. Acilio, again, like, you could just combo somebody and blow them up, but like you don't block that well. If you're buying the lightning cards, you might as well just play Aurora. There's not really a great reason to play Acilio. However, once Aurora leaves, if the meta slows down a bunch and the Guardians don't become popular, a whole list of ifs, maybe you become a better hero. I personally wouldn't play it right now. I don't think it's that great, but you're not terrible. Syndra and Phi I kind of look at in similar lights. Their matchup spread's okay in some areas and worse in others. Prism's pretty rough for you. Guardian's pretty rough for you. Assassin's pretty rough for you. Azalea's pretty rough for you. Unfortunately, I just don't think it is a ninja meta right now. Guardian Mastery set coming up soon. I could think it will continue to not be a Guardian or a ninja meta. Zen only really had game because of his really good mid-range ability. And his access to like some really good armor, I guess that made him more viable. Specifically, Traverse the Universe is just like an insane card. I don't think that Pouncing Lynx is quite as good because Traverse just says, I transcended, so I'll just block with it, get the value out of it. Whereas with like Pouncing Lynx, you have to have a bunch of things hit if you're going for Salt the Wound. You need to have an attack action hit in the first place to even use it. And then frequently, like if you grab Lava Burst, you need to set up this sort of combo-y turn. So I just don't think Phi is really worth playing. Syndra, everybody's running shelters. Everybody's familiar with your game plan at this point. Maybe there's something to explore with the blue Syndra lists, but not anything I'm super concerned about. Mario, just play the other assassins. I'm sorry, but you're just worse than the other assassins currently, other than maybe Azuri, I guess. Well, probably definitely better than Azuri at least, but I would just play the other assassins, to be honest with you. Dorinthia, I think, is interesting because you have a similar thing with Fang, where you can bring a Decimator Great Axe and some CYBs or something like that and punish your opponent for sideboarding incorrectly. However, once your opponents realize what you're doing, if they have a game plan into it, they're like, prepared. I think it becomes pretty iffy. Dawnblade, I don't think is in a really good spot. I've seen some switch lists going around with Jabil and Dawnblade that were going around like last season. I think Dawnblade or Decimator is probably where you would like to be right now. Hatchets is just too fair to be worthwhile. So I think you kind of need the spikiness of Dawnblade, but it's pretty hard to be Dory right now with all of these defense reactions running around. So I don't think she's worth playing personally. However, I could definitely see you being a specialist and wanting to take her. Maybe that's reasonable. Levia just is the worst brew right now than KO. Her matchup spread is worse. She can die to her own effects. She has a little bit, maybe more RNG involved. And then, yeah, I mean, I would just play KO if you're playing Brute, to be honest. But there's not really a strong argument to play either of them. I think KO just has like a pretty reasonable matchup spread where nothing's like going to blow him out, but he doesn't really blow anything else out, which is why he's in B tier, whereas Levia, I think, has like a much rougher time into some things. Kasai, similar boat to Dory. You're just too fair of a hero right now to be very good. You have some decent matchups into these top heroes, but not good enough to be worth like meta contention or like top meta contention, I mean. So I probably wouldn't play Kasai either. But, if you're a Kasai specialist, depending on your local meta, maybe it's worth bringing. Finally here in the I don't know tier, these are some heroes that I'm curious to see what happens with them, depending on where the rest of these heroes fall, and especially with Max, where his armory deck takes him. I know there's been a lot of doom and gloom for his armory deck, like not a lot of people were impressed with it. I myself, not very impressed with it, but it is worth noting that these are new cards, needs time to develop, as any deck in a card game does. So we'll see where it takes it. But I think you're probably better off just continuing to do the mech thing still. So you're probably like a C tier heroes, I would guess. DIE or Dash Adventure Extraordinaire and Teklovasan, I think, are in my I don't know tier for the same exact reason, which is depending on how much the meta slows down, these decks could be very good. Slapdash, Teklovasan, Assembling Exodia. I think Aurora probably still just blows you up. But like maybe, and Prism probably does too. Maybe the Wizards do. But you could probably like put them on a skill check sort of situation. So these are two heroes I think would be like, if you're feeling kind of saucy, just bring one of them to a ProQuest and ask the question. If you watch Protect Your Deck, we frequently will talk about asking the question. I think these two decks could be decks that ask a question. Enigma's gone now, so the only really board state deck that exists is Florian with Rune Chance and Prism with her Angels and Spectra. So with the absence of these other board state decks, there's nothing really to punish you for playing as long a game as possible, setting up Exodia, and then just, molly-whopping your opponent for a few turns until they die. So remains to be seen, and I don't think at a higher level that it would be worthwhile, but at a local event, could be kind of interesting. And then finally, you can see we have the Doo-Doo Poopy Pants tier here. I don't think any of these heroes are particularly worth talking about. Maybe the Bolton players will be offended that I said this. But there's just better heroes to play. If you're playing competitively, I probably wouldn't play one of these heroes. If you're just playing for fun, or you like to be one of those people that is trying to, play the non-meta, maybe they're worth looking at, but otherwise I would not. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today. Good luck to those of you going to any of the ProQuests this weekend, and I will see you next Monday. Wes, signing off.